not Steve McCabe MP, this is our Steve McCabe. Seem to know a few Steve McCabes, as it were. But look, thank you for coming this morning. My name is Alex de Ruyter. I'm Director for the Centre for Brexit Studies here and a Professor at BCU. What can I say? When we had this last gathering, the notion of an election in the offing was still probable. Against my better judgment or worse judgment, I kind of thought we'd have a January election because I thought we would agree to a pre-Christmas poll. So we go. Yes, and here we are. So our three panellists here today will talk about various aspects of the impact, or maybe impact is too strong a word, the exposure of the West Midlands to Brexit and ideas and thoughts going forward, and various related aspects of regional development and economic strategy. I'll say this though, in respect of that, when we launched the centre, when was it? February 2017, and we wrote a report which I'm never going to shy away from, because the report said making a success of Brexit. And that phrase got a lot of traction. I don't know why you're laughing at that one now, because the Juncker repulse was you can never make a success of Brexit. Well, if we invented that phrase, I'm still happy with it. But the point at the time that we tried to emphasise was this is not a polemic about making a success of Brexit. The point of Brexit is it's here, it's real. And if the government returns with a majority, it'll become real at the end of January. And then we enter some transition phase period of indeterminate length, which the government tells us they are adamant will end at the end of next year. Which is an interesting point, isn't it? Because if you think you can renegotiate or negotiate a comprehensive trade deal arrangement within the space of 6 months, I'd say that's very optimistic. Now, in my role, of course, I try to be neutral where possible in terms of forums like this. But as an economist, and as someone who's interested in business and supply chains and trade agreements and so on, look at the track record, look at the evidence, look at the negotiating time it takes to get a trade agreement between the EU and another country. Canada, 8 years. Japan, 9 years. Michel Barnier himself, I think somewhat optimistically, has said a minimum of 3 years. And then when you throw on top of that the fact that the withdrawal agreement that is currently on offer, which did better than Theresa May's, it got to a second reading. It got to the stage where it got a small majority to be debated further in Parliament. That withdrawal agreement is, in addition to the Northern Ireland thing, the customs border down the Irish Sea, the really interesting bit to me as an academic interested in regulation and so on, is the provisos around the EU's express wish that any trade agreement going forward with Britain not compromise their so-called level playing field provisions. That's the crunch. That is the crunch, because under May's agreement, there were binding legal commitments by the UK government to not derogate EU regulatory standards in the areas of environmental protections or consumer rights or employment law, state aid provisions, tax policies, etc. They're gone with this agreement. They are put into a non-binding, legally non-binding political declaration, which legally speaking is worthless. But what you can be sure of with that agreement, and when it comes time to talk seriously in the middle of next year about a trade agreement going forward, if the government is returned, the EU will not compromise on that notion. They will not enter into a trade agreement, I believe, with the UK unless the UK signs up to those binding regulatory alignment provisions. That's very important because, as a lot of people have pointed out, what is the point of Brexit unless you have the freedom to pursue a different economic model? There is no other point. None of it. All the populism stuff around migration, those issues are not going to go away, whether we have Brexit or not. The real crunch about Brexit has something worth doing. Ultimately, as Clinton said in '92, it's the economy, stupid. It's what kind of economic model do we want? What kind of roast corn syrup to be put in the Heinz ketchup. What your attitudes are to public service provision. As one of our panellists here, I'm sure, can attest. If you take away the EU regulatory framework and you replace it with something else, now it might be better, I don't know. Although it should be pointed out that under EU regulatory standards, they are a flaw. If you want better, there's nothing stopping you doing that. You can have better environmental standards if you want. The question though is, if you want worse may be too strong a word, but if you want to pursue a trade agreement with a country that has a lower platform of regulatory standards, then you can see the simple logic of why binding commitments to EU regulatory thresholds become unattractive. So if you want a trade deal with the US or China or India or Peru, mind you, the EU have got a trade agreement now being ratified with Mercosur anyway, so that's all the big South American countries. There is no logic to pursuing that form of withdrawal agreement unless you wish to have a drift more in the American direction. Now, I don't need to say that as someone with a political view on Brexit, I can say that with an economic view. There is no logic to pursuing this course of action unless you wish to pursue a different regulatory framework. So that's where we are. And because of that, because the prospect may well emerge that come the middle of next year and the government, if it's returned, seriously wishes to talk about a trade agreement with Europe, the crunch point will come then. So there is no getting Brexit done now from the perspective of the government. The rhetoric says get Brexit done. The reality says Brexit is just beginning. There are only two quick ends to this. One is revoke Article 50. The other is to leave in effect with no deal. So that, we have two distinct prospects here. I won't, if Labor get in, or some coalition or agreement thereof with the minority government, you're then back to resetting the clock. To quote Keir Starmer, said government, we go back to Brussels and try and start again and say, our starting point is we want a customs union and close alignment with the single market. In which case you'd ask again, what's the point of Brexit if you have soft Brexit? Better to be a member of the club and have a say in the decision making. So we have this bifurcated scenario emerging all over again, the distinct prospect of another referendum with Remain on the ballot if we have an alternative government, or the cliff edge scenario of no deal in effect reappearing at the middle of next year. Because under the withdrawal agreement, of course, this transition period, if we wish to extend it, and the option is there to push it forward another 2 years, then we need to give 6 months notice. So the activation point has to be by the middle of next year.
30th of June. 30th of June.
Yeah. That's 7 months. Now, I'm no trade lawyer, but I think, given the starting point of other trade agreements that have been negotiated, the length of time they typically take, I ain't seen the bare bones of a trade deal emerging in that length of time. So, in terms of where we are now, in terms of this election, you've all seen the polls. I don't have a huge amount of faith in them. The methodologies have been criticised left, right and centre, but in effect they sort of are determined on the notion of the trend being my friend, and weighting polling samples to previous elections and turnout and so on. So it's hard to say what will happen in that regard. As John points out to me, there is another unknown here in terms of the relative appeal of the Brexit Party. In 2017, the UKIP vote was what, 2%, 3%?
Less than 2%.
Yeah. We now have a scenario where you've got a party, wildcard, the joker in the pack, which might be an apt description. Which polling would suggest in the Midlands maybe drawing 15% of the voting intention, which will be higher in certain parts of the Midlands, of course. So that would be really interesting, because of course the Conservative Party election which took place in the NEC 2 days ago. Well, I was pitched here in Birmingham, well, for obvious reasons, because the Midlands is seen as the Brexit bellwether. It's the area with the highest lead vote of any large region. And there are a lot of Labour-held seats here which the government thinks are marginal. I don't actually think there are as many as they think there are. The real battleground is between Manchester and Leeds. And the so-called Red Wall. So towns like Wakefield, Bingley, Rochdale, Bury, Oldham, Widnes, Warrington, Crewe, etc. But the Midlands is seen as this totemic area. You know, we are Brexit land in the eyes of the London metropoles. And if you look at the seats, you know, and before I hand over to the panelists, I mean, look where the marginals are in this sense. 2 seats in Stoke-on-Trent, so Ruthsmeet and Garrismel. Is that central and north or central and south? I think it doesn't matter. You know, held by small majorities in a hugely voting area. So they obviously feel vulnerable there. And, you know, you can see the stance articulated for that reason. Closer to home, Wolverhampton Southwest, I think is that Pat McFadden? Yeah, Southwest. Yeah, that's deemed as a marginal seat because its majority is less than 5,000. Then you, where else? Yeah, Dudley North is featured. Dudley North, I think, is the only seat that is likely to swing to the government, because I think Ian Austin is standing as an independent and able to run a candidate. Of course he's endorsed the vote for the government. Yeah. Well, I think that seat is distinctly likely to go. He had a majority of about what, 20 last time, was it 2? Yeah. But yeah, at the risk of being a pundit, which is a stupid thing, I think the gains to be made in the West Midlands for the government are not as big as they think they are. Largely because a lot of the seats that they would have been looking to win, they've already won. You know, if you look at Halzone, if you look at Stourbridge, if you look at Dudley South, if you look at, there's no Neaton Conservative held? I think it is. Yeah. These are the areas which they, you know, they might well see their vote got in those areas, but that doesn't mean anything. It means they get a constituency with a big majority. Net effect, nothing. So, it is distinctly possible then all this election will do is return another hung parliament. Yeah. And if you get that, you're then back in referendum territory, in my mind, but we'll see. So, we've got our 3 panellists here today. Beverley, Nielsen. How to introduce you? Especially Beverley, because remember folks, this is not a platform for political broadcasting and any way to do that. But of course Beverley is also a colleague here at DCU, but we've deliberately introduced her as a parliamentary candidate because she's standing for the seat of West Worcestershire for the Lib Dems, right? So that's your hat today. But then we have Councillor John Clancy, former leader of Birmingham City Council, Labor member for Quinton Ward, isn't it? Correct. Now, that is an interesting bellwether area, I think, in terms of this upcoming election. So John may have some insights there on the ground knowledge, as it were. And then we have our own Dr Steven McCabe here, senior fellow with CBS and also fellow with Beverley's Ivy Institute. So yeah, panel, I mean, what I'm going to do is, you all know what a fire exit is. It's there.
Do you think start out? I mean, I see precedents in the 1970s because I'm.
Can I wait until you get your talking round?
Oh, right.
Yeah, I'm trying to introduce you. No, not yet, no. What I wanted to do, I'll have to do the John Burko number again. Look, yeah, so we have, how much time do we have, Beth? Is it till 45 minutes? So each of you gets basically 15 minutes to talk. I think John's record's about 4 hours. And what I would like to do here, rather than spend a lot of time prognosticating on the polls, more about the local impact. What do we think are important issues here in the Midlands going forward? And I say this again, and this is one of my other bugbears. In terms of the election campaigns that have just been launched, the focus has been on the north. Where is the Midlands in this? It's an add-on. Yeah, in the south, they don't even recognise that it exists. It's sort of like the north begins at some point between Watford and Watford. Yeah, actually, they don't know the difference between that either. So, and I listened to the Labour spokesperson on, he's an assistant to John McDonnell, the chap from Manchester. Anyway, I listened to him on Radio 4 last night. He talked about, we're going to talk with the regions if we get in without what they want.
Yeah.
And I thought, who are the regions? And this is my dig about governance, because we have a fragmented setup here. There is no effective, apologies to the Combined Authority because they're supporting us with something else. So, but it's limited because the Combined Authority doesn't cover all of the West Midlands. You know, it covers the old county plus a few bits and pieces in various forms. So who's the region? Compare that to Scotland with a government. Scotland does a lot better in terms of per capita funding arrangements than this region does. And I say a big element of that because it has a far stronger voice. Whatever your views on Scottish nationalism, pure, cold economic terms, it has far more clout. And in the form of a devolved capital, Edinburgh has a concentration and a nexus of political power that adds even more clout and makes certain firms want to situate themselves there. And I think both of our speakers here will have strong views on that, maybe. So, very important. This, you know, I could talk this up and say it's an important election. It is, and yet for this region in particular, it's important, given the exposure of the manufacturing sector to developments coming forward in terms of a hard or soft Brexit. And yet its voice is somewhat limited. So, how are we going to introduce the panel? I'm going to let Beverley go first. I'm going to follow the order of speakers. So, Beverley, that's 15 minutes for you to talk around some issues that you've picked out in this regard, please.
Okay, well, morning everybody. Very nice to be here this morning and to consider some of these issues. For a long time, I've worked really looking at governance issues for the West Midlands and really how our voice has been insignificant in the context of the whole of the UK. And obviously we're just one UK region, but we tend to be a sort of flyover region for governments of all colours, if I may say. As they look to the north, you know, the deserving north that's been depleted and maybe to some extent defeated over the years by industrial change and economic progress. And I think that we have sort of quietly got on with things, but we have tried to fly our flag, show that we are achieving things, making progress. Huge strides have been made in this region in terms of our post-industrial economy, which is tremendously sophisticated, has taken advantage of the single market and the customs union to see and welcome huge inward investment into the area from across Europe, but also the United States, Japan, and that has totally transformed the way that we have worked. And so when people say that prior to EU accession, we were the sick man of Europe, we have obviously become a powerhouse here, but a powerhouse in the West Midlands that has all too often been overlooked or in recent years just about recognised by the Conservative government, but for one industrial company, Jaguar Land Rover, and its supply chain and all of the other diversifications or areas of manufacturing activity out of that have not been fully understood. The governance issues, I've read a poll recently which suggests that the public want to see about 70% of the public want to see governance reform. I think probably their ideas of governance reform are very fragmented too. I mean, clearly at the moment, as a local politician, I'm a councillor in a district council in a shire county that is a big feeder into Birmingham in terms of people and skills and no doubt supply chains. The public are enormously confused about local government, whether it's district councils, town councils, parish councils, county councils, city councils, all of which we have in one little shire county of Worcestershire, let alone combined authorities which they scarcely understand at all why they exist, what's the rationale for them. But they know that they know that they don't know, they know that it's a confusing picture, and they believe that democracy isn't working. You can add into that point about democracy not working the fact that we elect a government on the basis of 43% of our electorate, and there's a sort of feeling amongst a certain element of the population, maybe a population that I represent as a Liberal Democrat, that this first past the post voting system just isn't working, and that in itself also affects the voice. But then you get to business, and as Alex said, business's voice, how is it heard? And yet, you know, Alex said, it's the economy stupid. Of course it's always the economy, but actually the generators of wealth that provide the jobs, their voice is overlooked too often. And of course we've heard our Prime Minister saying F business recently when it didn't suit him to listen to their views. So I think governance is a big issue. Coming on to the economy, very sophisticated economy here in the West Midlands, totally taken advantage of the huge developments, you know, that have happened in terms of forming a customs union, a tariff-free market, a market that shares regulatory base levels that we can all rely on. For business, this has obviously driven an integrated market, an ability to pull in goods quickly overnight and then add it to your components or elements of service provision, and then trade on in the next day or so. And already we are seeing disruptions to those integrated markets, and I can give you, even we humble politicians are affected. I can give you one very simple illustration. We were coming up to the regulated period for the election, and for those of us trying to get literature out ahead of that regulated period, very important to turn things around quickly. I had ordered a leaflet from Germany because they were very efficient, good quality providers of such things, but due to supply chain changes and of course regulatory, people were sort of preparing for the potential of a no-deal Brexit, and that meant that the effective sort of carrier for these leaflets had sort of changed all the way it was processing the orders that it was taking, but it hadn't informed the whole of its supply chain, resulted in a 24-hour delay for my leaflets, which then missed the regulated period and now have to go into the expenses for the election. So this, even we humble politicians are affected by these preparations. But if you think I'm one person and the impact of that right along our supply chains, our economy, the impact is massive. We've seen in automotive investment across the UK falling from 2.5 billion to 80 million in the last year. These are not just numbers, these are jobs. And I think we were just speaking prior to starting, very interesting economist at University of Birmingham, Raquel
Ortega Aguiles.
Thank you very much. Raquel Ortega Aguiles, who has said that there is a certain irony that the areas of the country that voted most strongly leave are the areas that are most strongly dependent on EU markets and will be affected most highly. And in the West Midlands, we have a 12% GDP exposure to leaving, and it's on whatever deal she is saying that we do. So, an 11% exposure in terms of our labour market. And what she is saying is, because we have relied so heavily on the customs union and the single market, because we are so heavily integrated, that if we go to an FTA deal, if we any sort of deal will impact on our economy negatively, and obviously a no deal clearly very substantially, and we have a 33% exposure in manufacturing. So this economy is an economy to really keep an eye on. We are heavily exposed, and we have, because we are great innovators, because we are tremendously entrepreneurial in the West Midlands, because we have developed all of these wonderful products that people want internationally, and because we've done it in a very efficient way, we are going to be exposed. Now, that doesn't mean to say that we can't change. I think for me, the big dishonesty of this discussion is how long change takes and the cost of change. And when, to be political just for a second, when Dr. David Nicol asked Jacob Rees-Mogg, what level of mortality are you prepared to accept for a no-deal Brexit? And Jacob Rees-Mogg wasn't pleased. I think you have to also ask, what hit are we prepared to take for either a no-deal Brexit or a hard Brexit? And I don't think we've asked those questions. I don't think we have given the answers clearly. And I think the population have latched on to the fact that, you know, we have not been treated fairly as an economy here. Our cities, like Birmingham, have had to look to Europe for funding, haven't been able to get that funding from the UK government. And as Raquel Ortega Arguelles points out, the regions are most exposed to Brexit because we haven't had the policy levers to be able to prepare ourselves. So I think, that is where the real governance challenge is for me, is how do we look for more investment, which John has got some very interesting ideas about, that we can start to build our own economy, and all of this entrepreneurial dynamism that we have as really creative, clever people across the West Midlands has to be put, in my view, more into solving our problems of social exclusion, deprivation, a transport system that is not integrated, an NHS and social care system that isn't integrated, that doesn't work, that doesn't serve our population, a housing that isn't built to meet our needs but is sort of 3, 4, 5 beds when we overwhelmingly in Shire counties need 1 and 2 bed homes. So I think these are the things that we need to direct our energies to. We are well able to do this, but we have been held back by an over-centralised government and an over-centralised governance.
Thank you, Beverley. Okay. Steve.
Okay, I start from the position that Brexit, whatever way you look at it, is always going to be negative compared to sort of remaining in the EU. But as Alex said in his introduction, so be it, we are where we are. I wrote something about 3 years ago, just after the referendum, from a historical sort of set precedent. If you look at the sort of 2 big cultural festivals in Birmingham, there's St Patrick's Day Parade and sort of the German Beer Festival, German market, I should call it. In fact, it's the first time. And of course, I mentioned that because, of course, what we've got is, if you remember, of course, the sort of the anniversary of the pub bombings is fast approaching the 45th anniversary of that dreadful night, and then you go back another sort of 30 odd years previous to that, you had sort of the Luftwaffe taking lumps out of Birmingham. So for me, what that indicated, no matter what happens, Birmingham will survive. I also speak as the sort of the child of immigrants who came to this city in sort of the 1950s, and if you sort of look out here, you don't see many chimneys anymore. The factories have all gone. My mother worked at Lucas's, my dad worked at sort of Rover, also worked in construction. Birmingham was a sort of buoyant place. You look at now, there's certainly a lot going on there, but the sort of the climate is very different. Beverley's picked up on this, that sort of Birmingham, the great industrial city, it doesn't have that heritage anymore. Just incidentally, I was doing some sort of research. It was about Brindley Place and the sort of the fact that when they were sort of building the convention centre, they discovered, or they claim, a graveyard which was they had to move the graves. The interesting thing about that was that sort of there were a large percentage of Italian immigrants. These were people that came over here 200 years ago. My point, quite precisely, is that Birmingham has always been a great melting pot of, again, as Beverley mentioned, innovation, creativity, making things. We've kind of lost that somewhere along the way. We make things, but again, as we're talking to Alex just before, manufacturing is dominated by one big manufacturer. You know who that is. I don't need to sort of name them. We're very dependent on them. We know that the potential for sort of Brexit to sort of undermine their supply chain is very great. Again, as has been indicated, the sort of whole thing about Brexit is, where are we in sort of the process? We're still very uncertain, and of course there is no great sort of certainty that by the 5 weeks today, when the sort of election results is announced, will be any further forward. What will these people do? These big manufacturers have the sort of potential to sort of to disappear if they sort of think the sort of the conditions are right. So where does that sort of leave us in sort of general terms? Brexit will, eventually, I believe, it will be solved. There will be some sort of settlement one way or another. The difficulty we have, of course, is to sort of, and again, I wanted to sort of talk about sort of 1970s. I remember sort of the 74 just about, because there were 2 elections that year, and the first of which was called by Edward Heath earlier on in the year, didn't get a majority. Then Labour got in under a minority government, and then just about managed to sort of squeak through. And the rest of the 1970s became sort of pretty difficult. We went through the sort of the economic crisis and the IMF being called in 76. And of course, what happened is manufacturing, Beverley used the expression, the sick man of Europe. Britain probably did need a bit of a wake-up call. And of course, that came insofar as Margaret Thatcher in 1979. And it was interesting, she looked to the Midlands as being sort of the blue-collar workers of the likes of Longbridge, that they were sort of ripe, if you like, for sort of hearing the message. And we're seeing a degree of that in, of course, these people who traditionally would be Labour voters, that they may flee from Labour, whether they go to the Conservative Party in the way that they did in the Thatcher Revolution is questionable. They may indeed go to the Brexit Party, although the figures there are variable. So the political landscape in January, because I think nothing will probably resolve this side of Christmas, will be, I suspect, pretty difficult. And then we've got not many days to get this deal sorted out. And I don't know what your view is, Alex, that will we potentially still drop out with a no deal by the end of January, because it's been said quite clearly, if there's nothing agreed by the end of January, no more extensions.
So I always defer to this statement, nothing is agreed until everything is agreed. I still maintain there is no incentive for the EU to force the UK out of no deal, because it implies a cost on both sides. But could you rule it out? No, it was illegal default setting.
But I mean, and of course, what we had yesterday is effectively a war of spending. The amount of money, it does make you wonder what was austerity about. And quite clearly, I mean, coming back to why did we end up with Brexit? Brexit was about people feeling disillusioned, disenfranchised, and there are huge questions. Devolved government. Andy Bowman talking about that last night. He was asked about the spending figures. He said, "I like what Labour are saying about spending, but I'd like to hear more about how they're going to talk about devolved government." He says, "I'd like what the Conservatives are saying about devolved government, but I've got no idea what the spending will be." So there is quite clearly an emphasis, and of course this idea of up north. I tend to take the view that for London, anything north of Watford Gap is up north. They don't really understand it. It's kind of another place.
Where is the Watford Gap?
Well,
it's about 100 miles.
It's a geographical feature. Where is it?
Well, indeed, but as soon as you well, okay, should we say
it's not next to Watford?
It's not. No, it's 100 miles north. It's 100 miles north of Watford.
Yeah, that's my point. Yeah, so I think
Rugby Northampton.
Okay, yeah. So the point is though that when we go from here, I mean, we're talking about what will happen to this region. Will it suffer? There is a great potential to do so. I suspect not. In all of these things, there's always some sort of compromise that comes about. And this thing will perhaps run on for another. Who knows? I mean, we have to think. The idea that Johnson said about getting Brexit, I don't think it will happen. I think it will be different to what he's proposing at this moment in time. And I suspect that this got a few more twists and turns. The reality is, of course, for people here in the regions, or in the Midlands in particular, is that their lives continue. They're interested about their jobs, the future of their kids. The one thing I would say from a personal perspective, so my children will be okay. Beyond that, they would have the opportunities I did to move around Europe in the way that was perfectly possible. These are all social things. And of course, the one thing that, dare I say, talking to people outside of the academic bubble, are they driven by the hard economic data? No, it's a passionate thing. Brexit is it's a kind of nationalistic thing. This idea of taking back control, and as we know, the Brexit vote was largely driven by people who felt that perhaps they've been left behind, and that their prospects have been undermined by being part of something that they didn't really understand. Could we have done things differently? Perhaps so. What will the future be like? Well, I don't know. I mean, one of the things we're talking about, hopefully in another 10 to 15 years, we'll see high-speed trains arriving here in Birmingham, but of course that's still in the offing. In certainly 2 years' time, I can't remember which one, certainly this summer, we'll see the Commonwealth Games arrive in Birmingham. That will put us on the map. But beyond that, that there has to be bigger plans of how we're going to deal with the region. And again, I do take Beverley's view on this, that perhaps we do need to become maybe more like Manchester. For somebody who studied in Manchester, it's different to Birmingham.
Manchester, though, is interesting, and this comes back to regional positioning, because Birmingham styles itself as the second city. You know, which is like, it's a substandard status straight away, but it has no geographical marker either, whereas Manchester is the capital of the north. So as a geographical brand, it's strong to begin with. And of course, linked to that, it's sporting prowess as a city region. That's to me, the biggest selling point for Manchester is the football.
United is a global brand.
Yeah, whereas, hey, you can tell where I'm from, and I can tell you before I came to this city, I didn't know where Aston Villa was. I thought it was Tom I kind of feel we're repeating the same nostrums here, but because they're important. You know, we have something called a West Midlands Combined Authority. Why isn't it called Greater Birmingham? We know the answer to that. But while this particularism continues to plague this debate, to me that holds it back. You know, I've got to say this, you know, I don't care about sacred cows. Maybe the answer is break up Birmingham City Council, then all the other boroughs won't feel so overshadowed by it. I've already earmarked the King's Heath Post Office depot as a future site for our King's Heath Municipal Council, mate. I don't say that just because I live around the corner. Birmingham, South and Hollywood. But yeah, this is important. You know, Beverley is right to highlight governance issues, because we have a lot of them. Not because the people in the job aren't any good, but because the structures are not fit for purpose for what is being demanded of them. Steve's point about we will survive is true. It's not deaf at dawn. The forecasts that were made by the National Institute for Economic and Social Research, which is a respected economic think tank, suggest that the Prime Minister's deal will cost the economy $70 billion, which equates to the average person being about £1,100 worse off than they otherwise would have been. But that's a growth trajectory, it's not an absolute figure.
But we're already worse off anyway.
I haven't finished. You're right. In the sense, you know, but will the average person feel that? Will they see it? They will see it in terms of concrete things like the exchange rate dropping, which is what happened, of course, in 2016. You notice it there, but then pinpointing that to one single event becomes very difficult. You know, when Honda announced the closure of the Swindon plant, in the lead up to that, they talked about Brexit being a factor, but they studiously avoided blaming it when they did the thing on the day. We know Brexit was a factor. We know Brexit was a factor for no other reason than the fact that the EU and Japan conclude a trade deal allows the importation of vehicles from Japan into the EU tariff-free. Now, one of the key advantages of Britain for Japanese motor vehicle companies, in their own words, was being part of the single market. If you can now export vehicles from Japan entire into Europe tariff-free, one key advantage goes. And it's in that context that Britain, as it stands choosing to extricate itself from the single market, becomes an inhibiting factor. Yeah, it is a factor.
But just to add, sort of come back to sort of the personal thing, every one of the factors that sort of my mum, and she worked for 3 employers, my dad worked for Rover, all gone, all the people I knew that worked for sort of the likes of Cadbury's, you know, the major employers, they've all disappeared. The point being, this happened whilst we're a member of the EU, so I can say this to people say, well, so being in the EU didn't help us.
Yes, and if you talk about the so-called lump and precariat, the people who work in Amazon in Rugeley, you know, 0 hours contracts, for a lot of people, they will tell you, well, how can my life get any worse?
Absolutely.
Yeah. There's like, what's that movie that was out recently, Sorry I Missed You?
Yeah, well, it's notice.
Yeah. There is a far more biting social commentary than anything any of us could ever say.
Yeah.
That is a reality for a lot of people. 25% of the workforce in this country, in effect, work in that sort of work. So they're going to say to you, well, you tell me my employment rights will be taken away if we shift to a US-style direct model. Well, what have I got now? Yeah. But the final point I make before I hand over to you, John, because I'm kind of hoping you'll shine a light on a pathway forward, mate. Well, the alternative ideas. You know, we need ideas, right? You know, you don't want to come here and just hear a litany of bad news, do you? We need a way out of this. Those forecasts about the average person being £1,100 worth off, of course, that's an average. You know, where it will hit is more precise in terms of regional impact. I don't think, you know, London, I think, is nothing to worry about. Whatever happens to the passporting status of the national institution, it will continue to be a global city. black spots, if you like, around here, and certain other locales, the North East being another obvious one. You know, Nielsen now wavering on Sunderland, for example. Those impacts will be uneven. You know, to come back to, you know, Mikel Ortega and Gilsmore, at 30% exposure in manufacturing, it'll hit certain locales. If JLR were not to scale back their operations now, and being a capital-intensive sector with physical stuff, you've got a sunk cost that says even in a hard Brexit, you can't just up sticks. They are committed to the region in that sense, if for no other reason than should things really go sour, it would take them a good 5 years to get out. Whereas for others, Nielsen, you know, with their deal with Renault, Citroën, Peugeot Citroën, with their recent merger with Fiat, you know, that'll place a shadow on places like Ellesmere Port, Ford, of course, Toyota, BMW. Again, BMW has some commitments in the region that they wouldn't be able to leave so easily. And therefore, I think that, you know, in the event of a hard Brexit, it may well not be blamed in the end because the effects will be death by 1,000 cuts on those sectors. It will not be quick. So, as a region, in order to counteract this, we need to think proactively about how we harness those issues. And that it really does come back to governance, but beyond that, it comes back to having a good evidence base. In many cases, we just don't have a good evidence base at the micro level. So I'm going to make a plug here for our own centre. I mean, we've been engaged by the Combined Authority to do a supply chain mapping exercise and Brexit exposure check of the transport manufacturing sectors. And the logistics is a key element to that. You know, what ports are they using? Where do they move the stuff? And I can give you a snippet. I think we might be subject to some kind of partial turd, I think, because of the nature of our funding, but I can give you a snippet. Right? We did a preliminary survey before we got into the mainstay of this, and the ports that were coming up as being significant for firms based in the Midlands. Dover was an obvious one for imports. Dominantly so, because the imports into those sectors predominantly come from Europe. But when you look at where they're exporting to, and the pathways that are then popping up then, Felixstowe, Southampton are far more prominent. Now, if you look at that and you say, well, what's the implication then if we end up with an abrupt departure at some point between now and the end of next year? Look at the state of those roads. Yeah. Who uses the A14?
No investment.
Yeah, so this is what we are trying to do. We are trying to help shape a regional response to this by simply giving them the evidence base they need to say, well, you're going to have choke points there, there and there. Now, Raquel's analysis, I mean, I work with Raquel on a few things, doesn't give you that micro level. In her own words, they look at the aggregate for the region in a sector. So what we're trying to do is to build on that and say, well, you're going to have choke points here, here and here. In addition to trying to get a supply chain map so we have a vague idea. You'll never get a complete supply chain map because the churn means that they change anyway, but you will get an indicative snapshot. And some contracts tend to be longer term given the specialist nature of the product. So we're trying to help inform and shape transport policy and industry policy going forward. But we need to know. Because if we could turn around and say the A14 is going to be a pressure point, then we could say, well, it's not just a case of putting an extra lane on it. The other implication, of course, is the weakness of rail links outside of London. Yeah, they're practically none. You know, go to Stansted, you could be sitting on it for 4 hours. But if those ports are important, then cross-country links become more important. Not everything being funneled like that. And when you look at a map of the country, it's actually frightening. Because we are reliant, for a lot of our imports, on routes that go through an area with a population of 30 million people. They have to come around the M25. So, you know, there is where you get the uneven impact of an abrupt departure or a hard departure. So that's what we're trying to do. So we're going to have findings of that. We'll have a survey with at least 200 responses, so we'll have a nice data set, and we're going to present that, I think, after the election.
Can I add a point to that? Because I think over years, before just passing on to John for solutions, over years, you know, I think we have become so sort of subjugated hope or ability to change our own sort of future to pull in any funds. It has really dampened our ambitions as a place. And the mayor sometimes, I notice him saying, we've got to be more ambitious as a population, but I would turn it around and say we have to be much more ambitious as a leadership. It's the lack of leadership ambition of this region that is the biggest thing holding us back. The fact that we can't see our way to raising new revenues, to finding new sources of money, to investing in the infrastructure, and that has impacted our competitiveness over the sort of 25 years that I've worked here, and is holding us back more than anything. And in the end of the day, Steve, you say it's about emotion, and I think I absolutely agree with you. But as you also point out, if you have a 0 hours contract job and you work all the hours that there are to try and keep things going.
Can I finish off my point? I'll let you come back to that when you do a round. My point is this. Those monies that the major parties are promising to spend on the North, as a region, and I can say this unabashedly, unashamedly, we should be making as much noise as possible to get a piece of that. A big piece of that.
But again, it depends on them. We should be making our own money.
That's a good point at which to pass to John.
Thank you. People are obviously asking me, what do you think is going to happen in the general election? What do you think the outcome of the 2019 general election is going to be? And I say, you're asking the wrong question. The real question is, what is the result of the 2020 general election going to be?
Yeah, I'm very sure.
And this, what's happening, I was very first elected as a councillor in 2002 in Hodge Hill Ward in Birmingham, and I was very pleased with myself. I overturned a Tory majority. I took out a Tory, which is always great fun. And I took out a Tory, and I got a great victory. And I've even got a photograph of the CFAX page that following morning saying John Clancy wins, because it was apparently significant or whatever it is. And obviously very pleased with myself, as you are. Can I tell you that the by-election was on February the 28th. It went dark at 4:30. Getting people out was a real struggle. It was very, very cold. And although I was very proud of my mandate, the turnout at that election on February the 28th was 13%.
Oh my goodness.
That's how I became an elected politician. 13%. Now, I know people seem to think people are going to get very... even at the last big one... I mean, 68% the turnout last general election? Start factoring that in. People are saying, people are very excited about it. Outside the Westminster bubble, people aren't that excited about it, actually. And they've got stuff to do 2 weeks before Christmas. And they've got things to go and people to see, and, trying to accommodate both sets of families on both sides and going to see them 2 weeks before, all that sort of thing going on. And I honestly think it's a massive gamble anyway by Boris, but having an election on December the 12th, I think is madness. Absolute madness. And I've been there. And it may affect both sides, admittedly. But I'll just give you that sort of anecdotal evidence, 13%. I will be surprised, I have to say, if we get over 55% turnout. And that would be pretty disastrous. Now, that may have been factored into the wargaming. I really don't know. But I think... really, we are here, I think we're probably where we are, or not where we are, that is, we haven't left, probably because of John Bercow's decisions in relation to novations in parliamentary procedure. I think I mentioned back in February at the annual conference, I think we were both at that, weren't we, in the Brexit conference in London, that these new constitutional conventions were apparating like Harry Potter things. Real students of the Constitution who really thought they knew the Constitution like I did. I'd never heard of these things, these new conventions that were coming forward. But actually, if you think about it, if we hadn't had the Ben Act, we probably would be out. We'd be out now. I genuinely think that would have been the order of events, and it would have been a hard Brexit now that would have been living with. So I then asked this further question, and that is, why did the ERG Tory group end up accepting a border down the Irish Sea that they were never prepared to accept? Why were they prepared? Why did they turn up to DUP meetings, pledging, no surrender? Why did it? And then suddenly they agreed en masse to vote for the withdrawal bill, for Boris's withdrawal bill. I can only assume that they fully expect a hard Brexit next year. And they knew that there was an order of events that would occur, and it didn't really matter the date that we formally left. I think the only difference would be there would be a treaty possibly in place that would have obligations attached to it, like the £41 billion, for example. As I updated the figure, it is 41 billion. Hang over before we leave. That would be a treaty obligation. But I think the ERG, and don't forget there'll be loads of more similar ERGs coming back, even if there's a Tory majority, because the softies, the wets, will have left, and you'll have you may find if Boris does get a slim majority, that he's fighting against the ERG again at the end of next year, or at the end of June next year, where they're going to sit there and say, well, we don't even want an extension. We're going for a hard Brexit on December the 31st, 2020. And I think that's what the ERG want, and that's why they came into line. I think that's the end game. And I think even if he comes back with a small majority, also he's probably less likely, even if he tried to put together some kind of coalition, to rely on the Labour MPs who would have come over to try and get something over the line as well following this election. So my feeling is that there is still a real risk that there will be a different kind of hard Brexit to what was intended a couple of weeks ago, but obviously WTO terms Brexit, because I think he will be under pressure from a more right-wing Conservative Party to end up with what they wanted in the first place by the end of next year. So and this is why, again, we said earlier in the year, I did come up with a temporary idea of revoking Article 50 with the express intention of re-invoking it a little further down the line as being the only way of getting out of this mess. But the reality is that it will not be solved by a general election. As Alex alluded to before, this is a 5-party general election. It's extremely difficult to predict what will happen in those circumstances, especially if there's a lower turnout. And we don't forget, for 2 successive elections, 2010 and 2015, Labour got around about 30%. And then suddenly they got 40%. And there's only one reason why that happened, and that is the Brexit Party, UKIP, and BNP actually, that disappeared in one election in 2017. And you had 2 main parties getting over 80% of the vote. That's not going to happen again. And that's how you get weird election results, actually, when you have that. So you're going to be back to a situation where everyone is scrabbling for every vote. And actually, if Labour gets 31, 32%, I mean, there could have been a rainbow coalition that might have worked in 2010 anyway. But everyone was saying Labour needs to be out for a while to reset itself, and look what happened, by the way. And people like John Reid and so on, who were saying, and David Blunkett saying, let's be out of office for a few years so the Labour Party can reinvigorate. Well, look what happened. From their point of view, it wasn't exactly the direction they thought. So my feeling is we're not going to get. I think if the Tories on opinion poll watching, and again, why should we? But on opinion poll watching, the Tories have got to be above 40% in those polls. If they slip down, if you start to, and don't forget, I think the last poll that came out, they were about 38%. Now that might look quite good 3 years ago, 38% of the poll. But actually, I don't think they'll get a majority on 38% of the poll. They just won't. So, the Brexit Party, again, Nigel Farage has an ability to impact disproportionately, it could be said, but I personally, I'm sorry to say, the Brexit Party and UKIP aren't very good at fighting elections. They get votes, but they're rubbish at winning.
But then they're good at disrupting elections.
They disrupt them. That's exactly what they're going to do this time, because they are, as I just said, probably in the West Midlands, there'll be a 15% vote. Now, once you start to claw away at that, you get chaos. And a 5-party election is chaos anyway. So, my feeling is we will end up where we started. And it won't particularly be solved. So yeah, we could get either a minority Labour government, a minority Tory government. The DUP may join together with ERG, and we have another withdrawal agreement, and we go for hard Brexit. So I'm sorry, I'm afraid I can't offer you any suggestions or solutions on the politics side of things. I can't.
Talk us around the economy.
Yeah, so that's what I thought I would move on to actually. What I don't think, one of the things that, when I was leader between 2015 and 2017, I tried to do different things in Birmingham, and I was out pretty quickly, shall I say. One of the things you talked about doing, taking, the phrase that I use and I still use is local economic self-determination. Don't wait for London to sort this out for us. As far as most people outside London are concerned, I think they view London and the South East as being a foreign country. They do things differently there.
That's why we wrote it out.
I think that's
Exactly.
I think that's the perception.
Local economic self-determination, whether you agree with that or not,
Yeah.
self-interest.
And I think that, and as you said, I think most people think that actually post-Brexit, London and the South East will be fine. But the North East won't, and Wales won't. And one of the things that obviously I had to do when I was leader was obviously sack a lot of people. And I also believe the reason we got the Brexit vote was actually austerity. And I think I think that if David Cameron had stood on a platform in 2015 of ending austerity, we've done 5 years, we've done what was appropriate, we're going to start, the sort of stuff that's going around today, apparently the money tree has been found.